Mat Ishbia and James Jones gave us their thoughts on the Phoenix Suns season that was on Wednesday. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, are we any closer to knowing what the vision heading into the offseason is based on what they've said? And if not, what do we need to find out? We'll break it down. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we're back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member, covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons, and the host of the Just Basketball Show, wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Friday, closing out your week, kicking off May, kicking off the offseason, a lot going on. Wherever you're finding us, please hit follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. We're free and available everywhere, including YouTube, so hit that button, get a new episode in your feed every single Monday through Friday. Become an everydayer all offseason long and get locked on to the Phoenix Suns. Joining us as he does to close out each and every week is Stephen PridGeon. He is a writer over at Brightside of the Sun, PHNX, CHGO, does his own content on Twitter and YouTube. Stephen, we have a lot to get to today. The Phoenix Suns made another news cycle for themselves with this press conference on Wednesday coming off of the sweep to the Wolves. You and I last spoke heading into games 3 and 4, so it feels like we've had an entire season this past week. It almost feels like. But look, you and I were discussing a bit our thoughts on this whole thing before we hit record, and I think vision is really the place to get started here, because this whole experiment, which I think even dating back to the bubble you could call, but really since Ishbia took over, has been about more. And I think this team is at a crossroads of, is that still the best way to go? What does that look like given the new CBA? And if not, as all the players preach continuity and Vogel preaches continuity, what does that look like? And I'm not sure if these people are on the same page about all that, and I think they need to be in order to make the moves on the margins that are going to take this team from getting swept to hopefully winning a championship.
I think you said that perfectly. And I think maybe one of the most apparent and abundantly obvious things coming from the big broom that the Suns got in the first round is that people in segments and factions of the franchise and the decision-making positions, whether that be players, coaches, front office executives, people are not on the same page. And I think that emanates from the top and naturally progresses its way down the paradigm into the players that are actually on the floor with the coaches. You know, we saw, quite frankly, the Suns not running an offense that I'm sure Kevin Young had in mind. Now, naturally, obviously, you give a little bit of credit to the things that the Timberwolves were doing in the first round, but at the same time, you don't put this $120 million that you have between your top 3 players, you don't spend that money to be dictated to by any defense in the playoff context. The one non-negotiable for you should be offensive production. And the fact that they weren't on the same page philosophy-wise, schematically, even with players playing with each other. We saw so much disconnect on the court that wasn't the typical that you see in product in a playoff setting. Like all of those things, obviously the stuff with Frank Vogel that Bradley Beal said wasn't what people thought it was when we saw it. They can say that in one breath, but in another breath, when you're not running an offense and doing the things that he's asking for you to execute on consistency as a baseline, that just shows that there's a lot of disconnect. And I think some of the answers that they were given in the press conferences, whether that be players to the media or Frank Vogel to the media, and assessing the tone and temperature between those answers, just all kind of slowly, like I said, just revealed ultimately what we saw, which was a team that was not connected.
Yeah, it's a problem without an easy solution, but I feel like we can get to the top level stuff maybe in the next segment, because I have some questions around why this played out the way that it did, and Ishbia in particular and his role in all of it. But while we're on the topic of the players, I get this is just kind of part and parcel for how things work in the NBA these days, but I mean, you can take it back, right? I think it's important to return back to the moment where after that Clippers game, right? The first one of that back-to-back, the final week of the season when they're down, doubled up and down 30 and all that. And that was the game, I believe, where Booker said chillin', right? And everybody wasn't really pleased with all that. And that game was weird. And even the next day, like the perspective publicly from Vogel, from even fans, I felt like, was very like, took care of business. You just had to split the games. And it's like they almost lost to Bones Highland. If you guys are cool with that, that's fine. But whatever about the game. I was like, you can't turn the page 5 days before the end of the season on how bad Tuesday was just because they beat the backups on Wednesday and you feel good about their chances to still get the 6th seed. Then it comes out in that Athletic article, that's the lead of the story, that the players were like giggling at Frank Vogel in the locker room after that game. Then Vogel comes out and cursing and doing all sorts of crazy stuff in the press conference. And then the players are nonchalant, no big deal. Kevin Durant's challenging Gerald Bourguet and Kellen Olson. What are you asking? Who are you asking for? What are you trying to get out of me? Book's chilling. And that moment obviously played a big role in how the season ended. So what I just don't get is the defensiveness, you know? And it's like, for Ishbia, Jones, whatever, to come out and kind of say, like, hey, when we invite those expectations, we have to deal with them. I thought Jones did maybe a better job of owning that. That's fine. But I do think that at a certain point, the offense not clicking, given the amount of talent that's out there, to me, that's the players. And to me, the not being able to stick with stuff, which you've been harping on all offseason, or all playoffs, all regular season, the stuff that was working, the stuff that wasn't working, the times when they went away from it, that's on the players to me. And I think that they have to do a lot of soul searching this offseason to say, are we being honest with ourselves about what we're capable of as individuals and what is going to fit best? Because if they all come in with agendas about what makes them feel best, what makes them most comfortable, what makes them look the best on the court, I think this is going to be right back to where it is, no matter who's the coach, no matter what other players are around them. Because I agree, the strength of this team is its offense, and they weren't good enough. They struggled to get up 100 points against a Minnesota team that I bet you Denver will routinely score 110 on in this next round.
Yes. And again, I want to make sure we continue to preface with the Timberwolves and how excellent in a sustained manner that they stamped their identity on the series, from offense to defense to everywhere in between. That's important to note. But also, on the flip side for the Suns, you say the players have to be more, they have to at least show more accountability in the hand that they played in the ultimate dismay that we've seen. I feel like that's right. Frank Vogel could have had the absolute best game plan lined up for the series. Kevin Young could have had the scouting report to a T on everything that they needed to do on offense, the negotiables, the non-negotiables, the things they wanted to consistently do. All of these things could have been as A1 as possible. But if the players don't go out and execute, like, what does this play that I drew up that works 10 times out of 10, what does that even matter if we're getting sent off script because we can't hold our position, or we can't fight through contact off the ball, or we can't get up the requisite number of three-pointers that we said coming into the series was a non-negotiable, just because we are reverting back to bad habits. And that's where, for the people that love to say that the 82-game regular season marathon does not matter, or there's not much you can glean from a regular season, I mean, those habits are the ones that you fall back to when you met with adversity. And what more adversity are you going to meet in any season, whether it be play-in or playoffs, when your back is against the wall? Those very same things you went back to when things were, challenged with you in the regular season are the same things you're going to do in the playoffs. You can't flip a switch like that. It just doesn't work like that. And we saw this team consistently revert to careless turnovers, not being on the same page, a whole lot of mid-range shots at the basket that just did not fall, and all to the advantage of the opponents because they're not getting up three-point opportunities. And now when you do end up generating opportunities, you're not in rhythm because you haven't been taking them. Game 4, you take 10 in the first quarter and you drop off a cliff and you take, 2 in the second quarter. Like, that's just a microcosm of the many inconsistencies that this team saw. I will say, though, maybe the best thing to have is an advantage for them is time. So we'll see who, extends past this season into next season. But I guess if you want to look at it pie in the sky, or not everything is doom and gloom, time is certainly on their side. But also Kevin Durant's 35. There's a lot of things that are going against that as well. So.
And we'll talk about Durant to close things out in a little bit more of a on-court way, but I guess too to give a little bit of credit back to maybe Vogel or Ishbia or Jones and what people might perceive as kind of speaking out of the side of their mouth, so to speak. Part of why I wanted to emphasize the players is, to me, you look at it and these guys are, it's like, I think that the leadership of the team is, I wouldn't say covering for the players, but I think it goes right back to the inconsistent on-court communication that Booker verbalized off that Game 4 and was obvious anytime you watch this team. I don't know. I think the owner, GM, coach know that what those players think is what's ultimately going to decide their fate, probably, and is going to dictate, like we're saying, what this team, how this team plays, how far they go, how successful they are. But I don't think anybody knows what these guys think. I don't think anybody feels like they can look into that crystal ball and have a clear idea of what is the best way. What do the players think? What are because I don't think that this group is really verbal and confrontational, and I mean that almost with a positive connotation, right? Like, speak your mind. Take this thing by the reins and make it something. And I don't know if anybody did that. And again, that has to be the players. But let's talk about the other people here as well, because I was confused about some aspects of what Ishbia and Jones said, Stephen, but also they did say a few specific things about the roster, about where this is all headed. So we'll get into that coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by Monopoly Go. Game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there is just too much good stuff in the game that is taking all of us at the Locked On Podcast Network by swarm. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments, work together to build up each other's boards, and win together, unlocking awesome prizes. There's much more to get on top of that. Stickers to trade with friends and complete albums for prizes, new playing pieces beyond the classic game, emojis and taunts you can toss toward your friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Imagine the board game, but it's immersive. It's a whole world, and it is on your phone. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges, unique minigames, and timed events, massive multipliers, and of course, big, big prizes. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now, free at the Google Play or App Store. Game on. Okay, Stephen, so I'm digging back through some of the quotes here and from yesterday, and I think I'll say two things roster-wise that we did get pretty concretely. I think both Ishbia and Jones don't think there needs to be a point guard. And I don't know how much you and I have specifically gotten into that, but I'd be curious your thoughts. And then secondly, Jones, kind of offhandedly, but I don't think it's an accident if it's true, said that the whole starting five will be back. So before we get into, again, kind of the roller coaster of the whole thing, like as far as those specific details, what were your thoughts on those two bits of news?
I, for one, don't agree. Well, I agree with them that they don't need a point guard, because you look at things in a playoff context, a lot of things come down to, can best players draw two to the ball? How well does your team play in those advantages that you create? How consistently do you create those advantages? And how efficient are you within it all? The Suns were able to get the most former piece of that, which is get two to the ball. Rudy Gobert spent a lot of time at the level of the screen. Karl Anthony Towns spent a lot of time at the level of the screen, whether they were switching or generally putting two to the ball. Those are the things you want. The Suns did an absolute terrible job executing within those advantages they created, if you're looking at the series as a whole. And I mean, again, that's quite literally on a playoff setting. That's playing point guard. Your playmaking off of the attention garnered, and that read and react offense is something in and of itself. A lot of times, as we see in series, after game one, even if not before halftime of game one, your sets are all being flattened out because teams are already preemptively expecting you to run things from specific pockets of the floor for specific players. Now, where you're able to develop a trump card in a sense in terms of a counterpunch, if you look at the Denver Nuggets, they have all of these beautiful sets and movement offense, motion stuff, all of this cute stuff. When it gets down to the nitty-gritty and they need a bucket, the ball's either going to be in Nikola Jokic's hand, whether that be him initiating action from anywhere on the floor. Aaron Gordon is going to be occupying a dunker spot. Jamal Murray is going to be in movement, or it's going to be Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic working in two-man game with plenty of spacing around them. It's no secret. There's no secret. So teams know what to expect, but how do you read and react and play in that? So you can talk about point guard this, point guard that. Jamal Murray is not a traditional point guard. Obviously, Nikola Jokic is not a point guard in any capacity. He has point guard-like tendencies, though, with how he maps the floor out. Same thing with Jamal Murray in his movement and how he plays off of the attention he garners. So they don't need a point guard. I feel like that should be out of the window as a talking point after this season, hopefully, maybe. What I will say, though, they could use someone in a secondary sense off the bench. So let's say it's just throwing names out there. I'm not speculating. I'm not sourced. Let's just say they were able to get their hands on someone like DeLon Wright. That gives you somebody that's able to play on the ball and initiate offense at times. More often than not, he can be off the ball on offense and be used as a cutter, be used in movement actions, all of that stuff. But most importantly, he's going to allow for you to balance out your infrastructure defensively from the point of attack, where this team was arguably, if not at the rim, they were at their weakest at the point of attack. So you get a player like that, you allow somebody to play point guard from a defensive sense. You start taking steps towards being that team that you ultimately desire to be. And then to the latter point that you mentioned with the starting five returning, that's not a surprise. I don't feel like that should be the starting five per se. I do feel like some of the issues they came into was because they're just putting themselves at a disadvantage from the onset. If you can use Grayson Allen as a super sub and find somebody that, whether that's Royce O'Neal or you find somebody else on the veteran minimum this summer, or if you're able to make a trade happen, find somebody that's bigger, that has more versatility on both sides of the ball that you can build around from the wing, insulate Kevin Durant some, insulate Yusuf Nurkic some, should he return. Now you're starting to build a boat. And Grayson Allen should be a player that's going to be in the 6th Man of the Year campaign, bar none. I think that's if they're optimizing things, that's kind of where I'm at. Yeah,
you and I are definitely on the same page with a lot of that. I don't think fans are, and that's fine. I'm willing to be proven wrong, but I think you can appreciate the season that Grayson Allen had and still be realistic about the fact that he's not a perfect fit for what the Suns need, right? And I don't think those things have to be in opposition with one another. He doesn't even have to change teams. Like you said, make him your 6th man, and he might close some games. He could be a great fill-in when I think at this point you got to say you should build in an expectation that Beal will miss time, considering he's done it for 3-4 straight years now. That's a good thing to have. But a bigger player could be better. I don't think them saying that the starting five will all be back means they'll all start necessarily. I also think on that side of things, it is a little bit just an admission of reality here that it's going to be difficult to move Nurkic, even if he might be the most ready-made guy to trade from his salary standpoint and if they wanted to move things around, but he just makes a lot of money for what he is. Point guard wise, I've talked about that a bit. I agree. That's where I've come down. I think an option is not a bad thing to try to look for and add. And that's basically what James Jones said, right? He's like, I'm not opposed to it, but who? Who is the guy? And can we actually get that player? And I think I'm sure they looked at options at the deadline that were more playmaker types than what they ended up getting with Royce. And I'm sure they probably put a call into DeLon Wright himself, who went to Miami on the buyout market and probably just didn't get him because Miami could offer a bigger role with Kyle Lowry leaving. So we'll see what they do. And I do think minimum players, I would encourage Suns fans to not be so out on that as a way to get at least one difference maker this offseason. I think it's fine to just say the Suns kind of swung and missed there, and that's fine, but Dallas sure didn't. They have Dante Exum I'm not sure if he's on a minimum. He might be on a small mid-level. Derek Jones, Kelly Oubre in Philadelphia is on a minimum. There's guys making a difference every year in the playoffs. Najee Marshall, he's sort of a different case because he's a younger player, but he's in New Orleans on a minimum contract. You can find them. The Suns just didn't do that this offseason, and they'll have to be better with their scouting and what they're looking for. Maybe not go so young. I don't know. The last point I wanted to make, though, is, and there will be more time to gauge all of this. We still don't know the fate of Frank Vogel. We still don't know a lot. But
I think also a big point in that with Frank Vogel is that we don't know who's replacing Kevin Young. And yeah, I think that's something we'll get into with the Kevin Durant part from my end, but I also want to make sure we sprinkle that part in too.
Yeah, I like it. And Ishbia referenced that multiple times as they know that's a change they already have to make. So when you hear from The Athletic and everything else of they'll consider big changes to the assistant staff, it's like, well, they already kind of have to. So maybe there's a built-in hedge there for what they can do. But as far as Ishbia is concerned, like, I think fans and I think the organization needs more from him outside of, the commitment to spend money. That's not all that's required of an owner. That's not all that's required of, if we're being really honest, like the president of basketball operations, which is basically what he's taken on since coming here, shepherding the Durant trade along. I believe that Jones is the one. I'm not trying to take the abilities out of James Jones's hands and act like he's just kind of a guy doing somebody else's bidding. He has to have talent to pull that stuff off. He's part of those meetings, but Ishbia is doing it. So for him to come out and kind of say, I'm not sure on the point guard, I haven't thought about the Vogel side of things, I don't know why the players didn't fit. It's like the buck has to stop somewhere, and I think it has to stop with him if he's going to continue to be so involved. So it was a little bit disappointing to hear him back off, be very defensive, in my opinion, toward media narratives and this and that. He was asked a question about, is it frustrating compared to your day job, so to speak, of running a business where you can just throw money at things and throw time at things and coach up your staff and train this up and strike this deal, to not have so much control over the outcomes as you do in that, which is a thing a lot of owners deal with. And he basically brushed that question off, but I think that's what he's dealing with. And the quicker he realizes that delegating, being a real basketball team, going through the growing pains is part of it, I think the better off the Suns will be. And he's going to need to take ownership of it and make hard decisions with a lot of this stuff. That's not just fire this guy, throw money at that, trade for this, everything else. So we'll see. But let's talk about Kevin Durant on the court. That's been a through line through a lot of the comments. James Jones talked about it. It was in the Athletic story about the concerns with Vogel and how the Suns season kind of fell apart. So we'll dive into what is the best way to use Kevin Durant at this point in his career on this roster, coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, whether that's superchargers, roof racks, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. I am honestly already diving back into eBay Motors because for some reason the basic wheel covers on my car keep falling off. I've already bought 2. Apparently I'm just going to be on my way to buying all 4, but eBay's had me covered. Low price. It has a check mark, so I know it'll fit on my car. I don't have to wonder and then have to return it. eBay Guaranteed Fit helps you do that. You're burning rubber, not cash with eBay Motors. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, let's close out the show. Stephen, we saw a lot of different versions of Kevin Durant this year. And I think that's important to preface a conversation about what was right and wrong or what could change with, because beginning of the season, he's Dirk. He's 2010 Dirk, just getting the ball in the high post and being everything on the offensive end during the no Beal, no Booker time. He has a stretch in mid-January, mid-February where he's just cooking, efficient as heck, and scoring a bunch of points and all that stuff. And then toward the end of the season, it did drop off. And in the playoffs, I think people were wondering what was going on. So from what we've seen from him, not just this year, but over the past few years post-Achilles of his career, and when you just look at this roster largely being similar at the very least, what do you think on both ends of the court we can expect from Kevin Durant or should expect in order to maximize him, which has been the buzzword this week around the Suns?
I think for one, they had this season one of, if not the best, well, excluding the Golden State Warriors seasons where it was completely just optimized is an understatement. But I think outside of excluding his Warriors seasons, spacing wise, this was his best that he's had. Obviously, Yusuf Nurkic is not a floor spacer, but he does skilled things that allow for him to space the floor differently than Steven Adams. And Steven Adams is skilled, but he's also not, Yusuf Nurkic, especially when he spent time with Durant. Neither is Serge Ibaka. So just kind of looking at it from that context, looking at those things. Yeah, Grayson Allen, Eric Gordon, Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, Royce O'Neal, Yuta Watanabe, if you want to go back to early in the season. It's just an abundance of spacing, an embarrassment of riches in that specific context of offense. I think the best way to optimize them is to continue to give them space. Double teams are inevitable with them. So when you have pieces that can shoot and play with advantage basketball and read and react off of him, I think those things are what optimizes him best. You give him that space to work in. He can see double teams coming from a little bit further away. Stashing Grayson Allen one pass away was a repetitive thing all season long. Same thing with Devin Booker. Same thing with Bradley Beal. So I think those things are important. I think the thing that was kind of missing, which will optimize Kevin Durant even more, having a center that can finish at the basket. Obviously, it's been an issue with Yusuf Nurkic's entire career. Kevin Durant, outside of point guards and shooting guards, is one of the best players in NBA history at feeding front court teammates that share the front court with him. Whether that be in screening roll, screening pop, finding him off of the attention that he's able to garner with his moves and isolation, or if he's cutting to the basket. He has a knack that I'm not going to say it's like Chris Paul or Steve Nash, where he's able to feed big men to that extent. But for players that are not point guards, if you're comparing him on a spectrum with players that, in that realm, he's up there. And if you have somebody that's able to finish, the scoring is going up. His assist numbers are going up. He's more involved. His usage looks a lot more fruitful because they're seeing the efficiency coming from it. And things kind of balance themselves out a little bit more from there, especially with him seeing so many double teams. In addition to that, I think that having an assistant coach that's offensive minded, so if you say someone that's replacing Kevin Young, somebody that's going to be able to garner the respect of Kevin Durant to where there's going to be buy-in to the system, to the things that the non-negotiables, the things they're going to want from them in principle, and that he's going to be able to consistently go out and execute and feel confident in. There's a lot more we can speak to, but I think as a baseline, you have to build a bridge off of those specific dynamics with everything he's doing.
Yeah, I think a lot of that, my basic level of how I would describe how to get the most out of him at this point is simple but impactful actions, right? So, for both seasons he's been here now, I've been just clamoring for, why are we not seeing more of those elbow pin downs, right? That just feels like a cheat code, And I think some of that speaks to the finishing you're talking about. If that pocket pass isn't there when the defense sends both guys at him, it does negate some of that because you're inviting a center to contest, which is probably the only guy on the court who can actually get a hand in his face. So some of that, and we saw it probably right when Durant got back last season in the regular season. His two-man game with Ayton was maybe the best we saw with those types of things. But even if it's not just that, any kind of, if it's him being a screener into a pop and then attacking a closeout or a switch in space, a lot of those little quick hitters are going to require him to have open areas to attack, to read, to manipulate. And, I guess my question just off of that, and I'm not even a question to you, just an open-ended question is, I do sometimes wonder, given that his name was the one that got floated in, look, he's the juiciest guy to make rumors about, and it's Kevin Durant, and is he going to leave is always like a fun thing to start a news cycle around. So I'm not pretending like I know this for a fact or that those reports are even fully true, but even before I saw any of that throughout the season, I do wonder where he's at with that. Does he feel like he's a different guy than he was 7 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago? Because we all look at, there's a lot of people who are like, okay, was that 2021 series against Milwaukee kind of that one last big knockout punch that he threw? Does he have another series like that in him? I don't know. I'm not in his body. You probably don't know until you're there, right? It all matters about how the 82 games go and what rhythm you're in and physically how you feel. And he played a ton this year. But I've said about this big three multiple times now, even just this week, I think if you're going to build with this type of group, those guys have to do things that aren't typically asked of star players. And so even if we can all disagree about what he's capable of offensively and everything else, to flip it to the other side of the court, I think the best version of this team requires a lot out of him defensively as a help guy, as a rim protector, as a, passing lane filler, as a, weak side space filler with how big and long he is, a rebounder. And so I think whether he's capable or not, I think the optimized version of him and the optimized version of this team, Stephen, involves a little less of him dominating the ball on offense to get to the very, very best of what this is, at least being more selective as to when you go to that. And I don't know how he feels about that. And I think that's going to have to be part of what gets talked about, whether it's a new assistant, new head coach, those big three getting together. They're going to have to kind of confront each other on that, I think.
I think that is one hell of a point that you're making. And that's right in lockstep with where I was going to go, because I think we would agree that he was the best player for the Suns in their first round series, right? Are we on the same page on that one?
Yeah.
Or are you kind of 50-50? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Questions for you. Who's the franchise player for the Phoenix Suns?
I mean, it's Book, right?
Mm-hmm. Who did Kevin Durant come to Phoenix to play with?
Book.
Who is the player that's quickly ascending like all of the franchise records and got a brand new shoe that just came out, and he's the guy in the city of Phoenix? He's synonymous with Phoenix basketball at this point. Who is that?
That would be Book.
My point being, for Kevin Durant to be optimized, he did not come to Phoenix to be the man. He can be the man. That's something that's supposed to be a counterpunch if things go haywire for maybe a game in a series. For Kevin Durant to be optimized, Devin Booker has to be the player that he was in the playoffs last season. Obviously, he doesn't have to average 34 or 33 points a game to that extent, though that would be certainly optimizing Kevin Durant if you get to that point.
Yeah.
But it can't be Devin Booker as a co-star to Kevin Durant. Book has to be that guy. And I mentioned the points and the assists and how he was manipulating the defense, the growth he showed as a processor and court mapping. But also last season, Devin Booker was the best defensive player on the Phoenix Suns in the playoffs.
Yeah, his defense was just not good this year. I mean,
it was not close. And I mean, even past just like standing in front of your man and contain the ball, Jaden McDaniels had a field day rebounding the ball when he was matched up with Devin Booker, which naturally he was guarding Devin Booker on one end. Devin Booker spent the majority of the series guarding him on the other. Now, I think philosophy-wise, there's something called tagging up that teams like to use, using the threat of offensive rebounding as a way to negate the transition opportunities for an opponent. If your man's crashing the glass, you can't leak out ahead in the floor. That's going to slow the game down, take away those transition attempts. That was a little bit of a strategic play from Chris Finch and company to consistently attack him on the glass. If you tried that on him last year, which Russell Westbrook certainly did, Devin Booker was still getting, 6, almost 7 rebounds a game in that first round series. Again, those little things, the marginal things, is what helped Devin Booker be that top 5 player in all the playoffs last season that he was. I'm not saying he has to be top 5 in the playoffs, but he has to be a whole lot closer to that than he was this past postseason. If he can't reach that bar, which I don't think that's something that it's not impossible for him. I think he's certainly more than capable. We've seen it multiple times to optimize Kevin Durant and even to optimize Bradley Beal, for crying out loud. Devin Booker has to be that dude. You talk about being one of them ones. He's one of them ones more often than not. He was not this past postseason. I would fully expect for him to take that, have a healthy offseason that he's transitioning into, take it with a grain of salt, take it into the 82-game marathon next season, and come out in the playoffs next season, ducking the play-in tournament, not waiting until the last day to do so, having a definitive top 3 or top 4 record in the West, and then going back to where you were, which would be now 2 playoffs removed from where you were averaging north of 30 points a game and you were looking like the best player through the first round and halfway through the second round.
Yeah, and look, I think everything you said, I'm not going to taint by talking over it or clarifying or even responding. I think you made a great point there, but what I would say to add is, as we're talking about the lack of clarity, the lack of confusion around the vision, I'm not going to say there's no vision, but that has to be him too, and not to give credit for the bare minimum, but he spoke this season after the bad playoff loss. That hasn't always happened. And I think the humility a little bit there of, he didn't make any excuses, right? He didn't, after previous years, it's been injuries or this or that. He said, we got to be better. We have to communicate better. We have to get on the same page. Continuity would be helpful. I feel like as much as an athlete is going to in that moment, he owned that. And they all did. I'm not trying to give him a big pat on the back for that.
100%.
But he has to take that and probably get his mental butt kicked in the Olympics, because he's going to have to compete for every opportunity he gets in that situation.
Against Anthony Edwards, of all people.
Yeah. And hopefully bring a mentality and a communication into next season that helps settle some of these things. And, we have more to figure out as far as what those relationships will look like because of the coaching uncertainty and the roster uncertainty. But that's what comes with getting a Supermax and all the stuff you listed off. And so you're absolutely right. Those guys have to be working in tandem together to maximize one another. Otherwise, this whole thing doesn't work, and we have some much more difficult questions and conversations to have. We're not there, but a year from now this time, if it doesn't work out, I think we could be. So that should be momentum and pressure, if nothing else. But that'll wrap us up. Make sure to check out Stephen's writing as the offseason continues over at Bright Side of the Sun, podcasting at PHNX. I'll be here as things roll along as well, so hit follow or subscribe on this feed if you haven't already, and we will catch you guys next time.